2 weeks pass in the brutal heat of the abandoned lands. Out in a marriage song paddy field, endless rows of flooded rice paddies stretch beneath the blazing sun. Tiny green rice sprouts poke out of the shallow water, and under normal circumstances it might have looked peaceful. For Alina, it was torture. She, Greatest, and Malenkov are still out there planting rice. Still, 2 whole weeks later, bent over in the muddy water, Alina carefully plants another handful of seedlings while looking completely exhausted. Her eyes are wide and tired, and every movement feels heavier than the last. In her head, she's practically screaming. This wasn't supposed to happen. She came here to establish diplomatic relations. Instead, she spent 14 straight days doing agricultural labor. Holding a tray full of fresh sprouts against her side, she groans as pain shoots through her back. At this point, it honestly feels like her spine is preparing to submit its resignation. The heat doesn't help. The sun beats down mercilessly. Sweat pours down her face. The tray feels heavier. The water feels hotter. Everything hurts. And worst of all, Kim is still patrolling. Like some terrifying farming overseer, he constantly moves around the paddies, keeping an eye on everything. Every time Alina thinks about slowing down, she sees him nearby, watching, evaluating, judging. The pressure alone is exhausting. Tears begin forming in her eyes, not because she's physically hurt. Well, not only because she's physically hurt, it's the realization of how ridiculous her situation has become. She came to build diplomatic ties. Now she's basically a rice farmer. As she plants another seedling, she remembers the mission Lady Millennia gave her. The plan had been simple: use the demons, maintain peace for the elves, gain an advantage. Thinking about that original goal now almost feels surreal. Her eye widens. The contrast between expectation and reality finally hits her all at once, and her body decides it has had enough. Suddenly she stumbles. Greatest notices immediately. The dwarf looks over with confusion, then concern. Before he can react, Alina loses her footing entirely. Splash! She falls face first into the muddy water. Greatest immediately shouts her name. Across the field, Malenkov looks over in alarm. The commotion instantly catches Kim's attention. His glowing red eyes snap toward them. He demands to know if someone just collapsed. The sheer force of his voice nearly gives Greatest a heart attack. Meanwhile, Alina lies motionless in the shallow water. She's completely drained, barely conscious, just managing weak breaths. The next thing she hears is splashing. Fast splashing. Kim is charging toward her. His cape whips wildly behind him. Everything about him looks terrifying. Alina sees the demon lord rushing straight at her, and naturally reaches the worst possible conclusion. This is it. She's dead. The scary demon is coming. There's no escape. Accepting her fate, she slowly closes her eyes. The world fades away. The scene shifts. The blazing sun hangs over a barren mountain range. Time passes. Eventually, Alina slowly wakes up. Her eyes crack open. She's confused immediately. First of all, it's cool. Actually cool. Which makes no sense. Wasn't she supposed to be dead? Or at least suffering? She blinks, then notices something sitting on her head. A tiny blue dragon. T-Bone. The little dragon leans over her face with huge sparkling eyes and happily chirps his own name. T-Bone. Alina stares. The dragon stares back. T-Bone. The tiny creature zips through the air excitedly. Alina sits up slowly, still trying to process what she's looking at. Was this little thing really the demon lord's familiar? Holding her forehead, she notices the cool sensation around her. Then she starts putting pieces together. Wait, was this dragon cooling everyone down? Before she can think much further, T-Bone suddenly launches himself through the air. Splat. He lands directly on top of a gray lizardman's head. The lizard man doesn't even react. Instead, he lets out a relaxed sigh. Apparently having a living air conditioner sitting on your head feels amazing. Nearby, another demon immediately complains that it's his turn. A human soldier waves happily and offers to switch places. The demon thanks him. The human cheers him on. The demon hypes himself up for more work. Everyone is smiling. Everyone is helping each other. Everyone is acting normal. Alina watches with a raised eyebrow. This is getting weird. Very weird. Humans, demons, monsters. Everyone is casually hanging out together. Talking, laughing, helping each other, not because they're forced to, because they genuinely seem happy, and that completely clashes with everything Alina expected. As she's processing all this, a voice speaks from beside her. Artanis. Alina immediately tenses. The Witch of Melody is talking to her. First, that alone is intimidating enough. Artanis looks out toward the camp, then calmly asks whether the scene feels strange to her. Alina doesn't answer. She doesn't really need to. Her face says everything. Artanis turns slightly away. Her tone becomes colder, more serious. She says elves have always been selfish. They rarely think about helping others first. They certainly aren't the type to join hands willingly. Then she gestures toward a nearby human and demon resting together. The demons are content living peacefully. The humans take pride in helping people who need support. That's all there is to it. Looking down at Alina, Artanis bluntly states that Alina probably can't understand that. She probably assumes humans and demons are cooperating because they're preparing for war. The words hit hard, because they're exactly right. Alina immediately realizes something. They know why she came. They know what the elves were thinking. Artanis narrows her eyes. Her message becomes crystal clear. The demons aren't idiots. The elves won't be able to manipulate them. They won't be used. Alina grits her teeth. For the first time since arriving, she feels completely cornered. Every assumption she'd made is being dismantled one by one. Then, T-Bone, the serious atmosphere explodes instantly. The tiny dragon comes flying toward Artanis. And the terrifying Witch of Melody completely falls apart. The moment T-Bone lands on her, she starts squealing, laughing, trying to pull him away. The dragon rolls across her face. Artanis yelps that it's cold, way too cold. She tells the little rascal to stop. The mighty demon commander is reduced to a giggling mess in seconds. Alina can only stare. Just moments ago Artanis was delivering a cold political warning. Now she's losing a battle against a baby dragon. After a few moments Artanis finally regains her composure. Mostly, holding T-Bone on her shoulder, she acts as if nothing happened. Then she calmly explains one final thing. Their demon lord is generous. That's why he's watching the visitors. And if they want diplomatic relations, there is a simple path. The one who works the hardest will earn that opportunity. Alina just sits there looking completely bewildered. Artanis simply advises her to focus on farming. For now, that's enough. Then she turns and walks away. T-Bone remains perched on her shoulder. For a moment she looks dignified again. Powerful, composed. Then the dragon starts tickling her neck. Instantly the dignity disappears. Artanis begins flailing around, yelping, laughing, begging the little menace to stop. Alina watches the terrifying Witch of Melody completely lose control over a tiny dragon. And honestly, at this point, nothing surprises her anymore. She takes a deep breath, looks out across the fields, then hardens her resolve. If farming is the path toward building diplomatic relations, then farming is exactly what she's going to do. The rice planting operation keeps moving forward, but there's a problem. Standing at the edge of the muddy fields, Zephyros watches the workers carefully and notices that the overall pace has slowed down a lot. At first everything was moving smoothly. Now, not so much. He points out the issue to Kim. The constant bending is destroying everyone's backs. Planting rice means staying hunched over for hours, and the workers simply aren't recovering fast enough between shifts. They've already increased the rotations from 3 shifts to 4, but even that isn't solving the problem. The entire operation is gradually losing momentum. Kim rubs his chin thoughtfully. That's bad. Very bad. They're racing against time here. If the climate changes before everything is planted, all their work could be affected. As he thinks, he can't help feeling slightly disappointed. His original plan had involved using Artanis and aged kimchi like absurdly overpowered farming machines. His personal farming tractors. Unfortunately, reality hasn't exactly cooperated. Neither of them has turned into the miracle solution he hoped for. While Kim is lost in thought, he overhears a conversation nearby. Someone asks if the work is manageable. A cheerful voice immediately answers that it's incredibly easy and that they could keep doing it all day. Kim turns. It's Ball. Of course it's Ball. The giant demon is casually wading through the paddies carrying flute on his back like it's nothing. He honestly looks confused. To him, this whole problem doesn't even seem like a problem. He casually remarks that he doesn't understand why everyone else isn't planting rice the same way he is. Kim freezes. Then explodes. He immediately demands to know why Ball didn't mention this sooner. Ball nearly jumps. Sweat forms on his forehead. Embarrassed, he explains that he assumed the idea was probably stupid. Since he's always considered himself a bit slow, he figured there must be some obvious reason nobody else was doing it. That answer somehow makes Kim even louder. He immediately yells back that Ball is not stupid. In fact, this is the smartest thing anyone has said all day. Then comes the reward. Kim orders T-Bone to place 4 praise stickers directly onto Bale's chest. Immediately, T-Bone happily obeys. Ball looks down at his reward. Then his eyes light up. The giant demon pumps both fists into the air like he just won a championship. He's completely energized. Meanwhile, Kim has already moved on. His brain is racing. The solution is obvious now. He starts barking orders across the fields. Everyone is to start weaving corn leaves into makeshift stretchers. Immediately. A diagram quickly lays out the plan. Each team will consist of 3 workers. 2 strong demons will carry the stretcher. 1 lighter worker, or a combat engineer, will lie on top. That person can plant seedlings while staying flat instead of constantly bending over. No back pain. No wasted recovery time. Maximum efficiency. Kim grins fiercely, his fangs flash. Finally, a breakthrough. He points toward the fields and roars for everyone to begin the new operation. His voice echoes across the paddies as he rallies the entire workforce. Everyone responds immediately. The new system works almost perfectly. Soon the paddies are filled with teams moving through the water like a well-organized machine. Stretchers glide across the fields. Workers plant seedlings without stopping. The speed skyrockets. Alina is completely swept up in the momentum. Lying on her assigned stretcher, she aggressively plants seedling after seedling while repeating one thought over and over. Work harder. Nearby, Malenkov grits his teeth and pushes through the strain. Greatest handles the heavy lifting, sweating heavily but refusing to slow down. Artanis' words from earlier are still stuck in their heads. They all have something to prove now. As Alina works, she sneaks a glance toward Kim. He's still watching, still monitoring everything, still paying attention to every detail. Her expression sharpens, the determination in her eyes grows stronger. No matter what happens, the elves will be the first to establish proper diplomatic relations. She refuses to lose. The work continues. Hour after hour, row after row. Eventually, it's done. The massive rice field stretches all the way to the horizon. Every section has been planted. Every paddy is complete. For a moment, everyone just stares. Then the celebration erupts. Cheers explode across the fields. The rice planting is finally finished. Looking across the shimmering paddies, Alina feels something strange. Pride. A deep sense of accomplishment, which is honestly ridiculous. This isn't even her land. She came here as a diplomat, yet somehow she's genuinely proud of planting rice. Around her, Baal, Sergei, and Azurat celebrate loudly. Humans and demons throw arms around each other's shoulders. Everyone is smiling, laughing, enjoying the moment together. Alina quietly watches. A small smile forms on her face. A few tears gather in her eyes. She's exhausted. Her body hurts. And yet, she's happy. In the background, countless voices unite into one massive roar. For a bountiful harvest. Standing at the front, Kim watches everything with his arms crossed. A calm, satisfied smirk sits on his face. The plan worked. As the celebration continues behind him, he decides it's probably time to inspect the fields again. But before he can leave, a voice calls out. Alina. Kim turns around. Standing behind him are Alina, Gratis, and Malenkov. Alina addresses him formally as Demon Lord Kratos. Then she smiles, a genuine smile. She admits that she was terrified of him at first, but despite everything, this experience ended up teaching her a lot. Then she finally introduces their group properly. They're diplomats, representatives of the elves, the magic tower, and the dwarves. They came to observe the noble labor of the demon race. Silence. Kim blinks, once, twice. Then his entire face breaks. What? The scream practically shakes the air. His eyes nearly pop out of his head. They were diplomats? Actual diplomats? Foreign dignitaries? Kim immediately starts panicking. Sweat pours down his face. He frantically asks why they didn't tell him that earlier, because now a horrifying realization is crashing into him. He accidentally forced important international representatives into weeks of brutal farm labor. Meanwhile Alina, Gratis, and Malenkov just stare at him, completely expressionless. After everything they've suffered, they don't even have the energy to respond. Then another figure steps into view. Artanis. T-Bone is sitting comfortably on her shoulder. The moment Alina sees her, everything clicks. The advice, the manipulation, the motivation, the farming, the whole situation. Artanis notices the look. Even behind her mask, she immediately starts sweating. T-Bone blinks innocently. Alina's face turns pale, then red, then absolutely furious. She points directly at Artanis and unleashes a scream powerful enough to rival the demons themselves. You! Subscribe. Comment. Back at the hut, things start off almost comically differently from what you'd expect from a demon lord. Kim is practically folding himself in half apologizing. He keeps bowing over and over across the table while Malenkov, Gratis, and Alina watch. His voice is full of panic as he repeatedly insists that none of this was intentional. He begs them to forgive him, stressing that he genuinely never meant to drag foreign representatives into weeks of farm labor. For a moment, it looks like the diplomats have all the leverage. Gratis certainly thinks so. Watching Kim desperately apologize, the dwarf immediately comes to a conclusion. The demon lord is groveling. That means he's vulnerable. And if he's vulnerable, this is the perfect time to force favorable diplomatic terms. Without hesitation, Gratis slams his fist onto the table and demands to know whether Kim really thinks a simple apology can settle something like this. Malenkov quickly joins in. With a dark look on his face, he adds that such treatment toward a representative of the magic tower is completely unacceptable. The two of them are clearly trying to apply pressure. Then they glance toward Alina, expecting her to pile on as well. Instead, she hesitates. After thinking for a moment, she quietly wonders whether this was really neglect at all. That answer immediately irritates Malenkov. He snaps back, reminding her of everything they went through. He complains that Kim worked them relentlessly and points out that he'd never even touched dirt during his life at the Magic Tower before being dragged into this nightmare. Meanwhile, Kim just keeps apologizing. The poor guy looks like he's being publicly executed. He's trembling while bowing repeatedly and blurting out apology after apology. Unfortunately, Gradus and Malenkov completely misread the situation. Seeing Kim act this way only makes them more confident. In their minds, this famous demon lord suddenly seems surprisingly ordinary. Maybe even weak. Feeling emboldened, Malenkov starts pushing for diplomatic negotiations right there. Gradus follows up by loudly demanding that Kim bring out the negotiation documents. And then, everything changes. The room falls silent. Kim stops bowing. Just stops. A shadow falls across his face. In a low voice, he quietly asks, "What if I refuse?" For a second, Gradus and Malenkov don't even understand what they're hearing. Both of them stare blankly. Huh? The cheerful apologetic farmer is gone. Kim slowly raises his head. His eyes glow red. The expression on his face is genuinely intimidating. Then he calmly asks what exactly they plan to do if he refuses. The atmosphere instantly becomes suffocating. Gradus and Malenkov visibly stiffen. Sweat starts forming. Alina quietly watches from between them. Standing over the table, Kim explains that his apology was sincere. If they were honestly upset, he was even willing to compromise and discuss things. But there's a line. His voice grows colder. He says he has no interest in working with people who take advantage of someone while they're bowing their head. That hits hard. Because that's exactly what they were doing. Gradus realizes it immediately. The confidence vanishes from his face. He starts sweating bullets and desperately tries to walk back everything he said. Suddenly he's offering dwarven smithing techniques and valuable craftsmanship knowledge. Anything to repair the damage. Kim doesn't budge. With a cold sideways glance, he points out that regardless of what Gradus meant, he never actually promised diplomatic relations in the first place. The dwarf looks like his soul just left his body. Then Malenkov panics too. He practically lunges forward. Dropping to the floor, he starts desperately begging. He argues that an alliance with the Magic Tower would be incredibly valuable. Together they could gain immense military power and potentially dominate the continent. That turns out to be exactly the wrong thing to say. Kim looks at him like he's lost his mind. He bluntly replies that he already has plenty of ways to make a living. Why would he want to rule the world? Then he directly asks whether their entire plan was basically to drag him into a war. Malenkov freezes. Because, yeah, that was pretty much the plan. Kim has heard enough. His eyes flash crimson as he calls for Ball. The giant demon immediately appears. Without any effort whatsoever, Ball picks up both diplomats like oversized bags of groceries. Gradus and Malenkov immediately start shouting. Now they're suddenly talking about helping with farming, sharing tools, offering useful magic, anything they can think of. Too late. Kim orders them out by sunrise. The heavy door slams shut behind them. And just like that, their diplomatic offensive completely collapses. The room finally becomes quiet. Kim lets out a long sigh. He's met people like this before. The kind who become arrogant the moment they think they have leverage, then instantly switch to begging when they lose it. People like that inevitably cause problems. With the chaos over, Alina quietly rises from her seat. She calmly announces that she'll return to her tent as well. Before she leaves, Kim stops her. He asks directly whether she originally came for diplomatic relations too. Alina doesn't dodge the question. She honestly admits that she did. In fact, her original goal wasn't much different from the others. She also wanted to use the demon's strength. She wanted an alliance that could help the elves secure dominance and protect themselves through overwhelming power. Kim looks genuinely surprised by the honesty. Then he asks why she's giving up so easily. Alina smiles softly, and her answer is completely different from the others. She explains that after spending time here, she changed her mind. She saw how the demons actually lived. She saw them helping one another, working together, laughing together. She saw people finding hope through farming. And she saw Kim genuinely happy when talking about harvests and crops instead of conquest and war. With complete sincerity, she apologizes for originally wanting to use them as tools. Then she says she'll pray for their harvest to succeed. No demands, no negotiations, no schemes, just a sincere wish for their success. After saying her piece, she turns and starts walking away into the night. Kim stands there quietly, thinking. Then he suddenly calls out to her. Alina stops. Kim catches up and flashes a small grin. And then, completely unexpectedly, he announces that from this day forward, the demons will consider the elves allies. If the elves ever need help, they can ask. There is only one condition. No war. Absolutely no war. Alina looks back over her shoulder. A calm smile spreads across her face. The scene opens on a quiet night beneath a bright full moon. After everything that happened during the diplomatic meeting, the camp has mostly settled down, and inside a simple tent, Alina, Gratis, and Malenkov are resting on floor mats. At least, two of them are trying to rest. While Alina and Gratis sleep, Malenkov lies awake staring into the darkness with sweat on his face and frustration burning in his eyes. The failed negotiations clearly haven't left his mind. He quietly grumbles to himself that he should have used diplomacy as an excuse to stay longer instead of letting things end so quickly. Then his thoughts drift back to his real objective. His expression hardens as he reminds himself that he still has a mission from the Magic Tower. No matter what happens, he has to find Bragia's holy sword. In his imagination, the legendary weapon appears before him, a dark, ominous blade surrounded by a violet-purple aura with a sinister eye embedded within it. Just thinking about it reignites his determination. The next morning arrives. The sun rises over the Rocky Mountains as the three visitors prepare to leave the demon settlement. Kim comes to see them off personally. He greets them warmly and thanks them for all their hard work during their stay. However, he apologetically admits he won't be able to accompany them very far. The reason becomes obvious immediately. A thick white bandage is completely wrapped around his eyes. With an embarrassed smile, Kim explains that he pushed his blood eye ability too far while monitoring the fields and temporarily ruined his vision. For the moment, he's effectively blind. Despite that, he still makes arrangements for them. He gestures toward a small flying demon bat and tells it to guide the group safely out of the area using the quickest shortcuts. The little bat immediately acknowledges the order. Alina smiles at Kim. Unlike when she first arrived, there's genuine warmth in her expression now. She tells him she hopes they'll meet again someday. Kim smiles back. Standing behind her, however, Malenkov remains silent. His face is dark and tense. Even now, he's still thinking about the Magic Tower's orders and refuses to give up. Back in the settlement, daily life continues. Demons are hard at work harvesting corn beneath the daylight. Among the tall stalks, Flute suddenly pauses. She tilts her head in confusion after noticing something unusual. Flying through the air is T-Bone. The tiny blue dragon looks strangely nervous and is fluttering around in an obvious hurry. Flute calls out his name, but whatever he's trying to communicate leaves her completely confused. Meanwhile, the travelers continue their journey. Led by the flying guide bat, they cross a long suspension bridge stretched between enormous rock formations. Partway across, Malenkov suddenly grabs his face and starts coughing dramatically. He complains that he must have overworked himself. Alina doesn't look remotely sympathetic. Without missing a beat, she bluntly remarks that people from the Magic Tower are known for being physically weak even compared to ordinary humans. Malenkov looks thoroughly offended. Still sweating, he asks the guide bat whether it would really be impossible for him to stay behind and rest for just one more day. The bat thinks about it and casually replies that one day shouldn't be a problem. After all, the Demon Lord is pretty generous. The moment Malenkov hears that, his face changes. A huge grin slowly spreads across his face. Internally, he's ecstatic. This is exactly the opportunity he wanted. If he stays behind, he can search for Bragia's holy sword. Elsewhere, back at the settlement, Artanis is standing in a cornfield looking around in confusion. Something feels wrong. Specifically, she hasn't seen T-Bone in quite a while. She approaches Flute and asks whether she's seen the little dragon. Flute immediately says yes. Earlier in the afternoon, she saw T-Bone flying toward the coastal cliffs in a huge hurry. That answer instantly worries Artanis. T-Bone normally doesn't act like this. Before she can investigate further, Zephyros calls out from across the fields, warning her that the harvest work is falling behind. Artanis visibly tenses. She calls back that she's coming. Then she quickly asks Flute for a favor. Clearly worried, she explains that T-Bone has never behaved this strangely before and asks Flute to find him. Flute immediately agrees. The scene shifts toward the coast. Below towering cliffs, waves crash against the rocks. Near the shoreline sits a dark cave entrance. Several golden ceiling boards block the entrance completely, making it obvious this place is dangerous and forbidden. Flute races along the cliffside, repeatedly shouting T-Bone's name. The more she searches, the more nervous she becomes. Eventually she crawls carefully toward the edge of a cliff and peers down below. The moment she sees what's there, her eyes widen. A scream escapes her mouth. Standing near the sealed cave is Malenkov. The moment she spots him, she understands something is wrong. Without hesitation, she slides down the steep cliff toward him. As she descends, she shouts that nobody is allowed to enter because the Demon Lord specifically forbade it. Malenkov turns. The instant he recognizes Flute, panic flashes across his face. He curses under his breath. If she reports him, everything is over. Acting immediately, he raises his staff. Magic erupts. A massive fireball bursts forward and hurtles directly toward Flute. She glances back just in time to see it coming. Then, impact. The fireball explodes against her in a massive burst of flames. The entire area is consumed by a blinding explosion. Flute cries out as the blast engulfs her. When the smoke begins to settle, her body crashes heavily onto the rocky ground and tumbles through the dust. Watching from a distance, Malenkov finally exhales. For a moment, relief washes over him. That was close. Fortunately, he thinks, she's just a kid. Easy to deal with. Then something moves. Malenkov freezes. Through the settling dust, Flute slowly pushes herself up from the ground. She's alive. Completely alive. Shock spreads across Malenkov's face. Flute rises onto her hands and knees. Then she lifts her head. Her expression is no longer confused. No longer friendly nor no longer innocent. Her sharp teeth are bared. Her eyes have turned completely white. Pure rage radiates from her. She screams that it hurts and demands to know whether he's some kind of villain. At that exact moment, a system notification appears. It identifies her. Name, Flute. Rank, low rank. And then the detail that completely destroys Malenkov's confidence. Habitat, final boss area. Malenkov's face instantly drains of color. His confident smile disappears. His eyes bulge. His mouth falls open. And then he unleashes a full-blown scream of absolute terror as he finally realizes what kind of monster he just attacked. Subscribe. Comment. Flute's sudden recovery completely rattles Malenkov. Sweat runs down his face as he grips his magic staff tighter, staring at the little demon girl in disbelief while she bares her sharp teeth and growls like a wild beast ready to pounce. He can't believe what he's seeing. She had taken the full force of his fire spell without flinching, making him wonder if this child was actually some kind of high-ranking mage. Before he can think any further, Flute's eyes blaze into a solid white glow as her anger boils over. She shouts that the demon lord personally warned everyone that no one must enter this cave because doing so would bring disaster upon the demons. No matter what happened, she refused to let him take another step. Realizing fire wasn't going to work, Malenkov grits his teeth and calls her an insolent little brat. Purple magic gathers around both his hand and his staff as he quickly changes tactics. If she could resist fire, then he'd simply slice her down with physical magic instead. With a powerful swing of his staff, he unleashes the blade of execution, sending a massive crescent-shaped slash racing straight toward Flute. The attack lands dead on. Flute lets out a sharp cry as the magical blade crashes into her, and then simply breaks apart against her body. Malenkov freezes in absolute disbelief. Before he can even process what happened, Flute explodes forward with her jaws wide open, roaring ferociously as she charges him. The fearless little girl suddenly feels more like a charging monster, and Malenkov completely loses his composure, screaming at the top of his lungs. Flute tears across the rocky ground at incredible speed before suddenly launching herself into the air. Malenkov barely manages to dodge at the last second. Rolling aside, he lets out a relieved grin, convinced she was still just an inexperienced kid who attacked too recklessly. That confidence lasts for exactly 1 second. Flute crashes straight into the massive rock behind him, and completely shatters it. The entire boulder explodes into pieces. Malenkov's face drains of color as he stares at the destroyed rock in horror. That wasn't just brute strength. It was monstrous. Before he can react, Flute grabs him by the front of his cloak. A tiny child effortlessly lifts a grown man high above her head like he weighs absolutely nothing. His staff slips from his hands as panic fills his face. Then she slams him straight into the ground. The impact shakes the area, smashing the rocks beneath him. Malenkov coughs up blood as he lies completely broken among the rubble, staring upward in total shock. Standing over him, Flute proudly declares that she's taking him straight to the adults. He tried to sneak into the forbidden cave, attacked her, and now everyone was going to hear about it. Knowing he can't win in a fight anymore, Malenkov immediately changes strategies. Still lying on the ground with blood running from his mouth, he forces out a weak voice and insists that everything is just one big misunderstanding. He claims he never came here with bad intentions. Flute hesitates. Her angry expression softens into confusion as she innocently asks why he came here in the first place. Seeing his opportunity, Malenkov quietly tells her to come a little closer because there's something he wants to show her. Curious, Flute steps within arm's reach. The instant she does, Malenkov pulls out a hidden spray bottle and blasts its contents directly into her face. Flute gasps in surprise. Almost immediately, her eyes become unfocused. She sways back and forth, looking completely dizzy as she weakly mutters a confused question. A moment later, thunk, she falls flat onto the cracked cave floor, completely unconscious. Malenkov slowly pushes himself back up and lets out a sinister laugh. Holding up the small bottle with a smug grin, he explains that it's a magical item called Heavy Metal Lullaby, originally created to treat insomnia. Thankfully for him, even though Flute resisted powerful attack magic, she had no resistance against this sleeping mist. Looking at the unconscious girl, he decides this actually works in his favor. He casually throws her over his shoulder, thinking she can serve as the perfect hostage if anything goes wrong. Finally, his eyes turn toward the dark entrance beyond the barricades. His goal has never changed. Bragia's holy sword should be waiting somewhere inside that forbidden cave. Without another moment of hesitation, Malenkov steps past the sealed barricades and walks straight into the darkness with flute slung over his shoulder, convinced that obtaining this legendary treasure will ultimately secure a bountiful future for the magic tower. The story shifts back to the peaceful cornfields, where everyone is hard at work harvesting under the bright afternoon sun. The calm atmosphere doesn't last long though, because Artanis walks over to Kim with something clearly weighing on her mind. She cautiously calls his name while Kim stands with his arms crossed, facing away from her. The moment he turns around, his face is so terrifying that Artanis immediately throws both hands into the air and panics, yelling that she isn't messing around. Meanwhile, Kim just stares at her in confusion before pointing out that he hasn't even said anything yet. Artanis fires right back, insisting he doesn't need to speak because his face already says everything. Poor Kim can only complain that she's being way too harsh on him. After the brief misunderstanding, Artanis settles down and adjusts her collar before finally getting to the real issue. She explains that she hasn't seen T-Bone since this morning. Hearing that immediately changes Kim's expression. The intimidating look disappears, replaced by genuine concern, though he can't help asking her to stop making such dramatic poses while she's talking. Thinking it over, Kim rubs his tired eyes and quietly says that something feels wrong. T-Bone isn't the type to wander off by himself without telling anyone. Artanis agrees. That's exactly why she sent Flute to search for him. The problem is, Flute hasn't come back either. She adds that the last report she received was that T-Bone had been flying toward the coastal cliffs. Kim's expression turns serious. He knows that area is incredibly dangerous. The cliffs overlook violent waves, so even a single fall could be fatal. Then another thought hits him. Bragia's holy sword. The one hidden inside the sealed cave near those cliffs. The very weapon that would bring unimaginable disaster if someone ever pulled it free. Artanis suggests gathering a search party and sending several demons to help find the children. Kim immediately rejects the idea. His answer is firm. The cliffs are simply too dangerous for everyone else. Instead of risking more lives, he'll go alone. As Kim leaves, aged Kimchi silently watches from the middle of the cornfield with a huge basket of harvested crops resting across his back. One phrase keeps echoing in his mind. The cliffs. Something about those words stirs a forgotten memory buried deep inside him. Suddenly, a powerful flashback crashes into his mind. He sees an enormous shadow looming over a rugged stone wall. The image shifts. Floating before him is Bragia's beautiful hammer. Then the memory changes again, revealing a battlefield completely covered with fallen warriors, their bodies scattered across the rocky ground after a devastating battle. The vision disappears just as suddenly as it came. Back in the present, aged Kimchi remains perfectly still. His eyes narrow. More pieces of his lost memories begin falling into place. That weapon. It was sealed inside a hidden cave near those very cliffs. He continues staring ahead in complete silence, repeating the word "end" in his mind as though another memory is just about to surface. Meanwhile, Kim races across the barren landscape at full speed, his cape whipping wildly behind him as he pushes himself toward the cliffs. As he runs, he mentally reviews everything he remembers about the Holy Sword Dungeon. It's one of the game's completely hidden areas. Players normally don't even discover it until right before the final battle against Kratos. And the dungeon itself is absolutely brutal. Kim remembers it being filled with countless deadly traps designed purely to kill anyone who entered. Spears, spikes, hidden mechanisms. It was the kind of place where you'd probably die dozens of times before finally reaching the end. Deep inside waits Bragia's holy sword. The strongest weapon in the entire game. It rests peacefully upon a stone altar inside an ancient hall lined with towering pillars, hiding its true nature behind an innocent appearance. Kim remembers exactly what happens when someone pulls it out. The instant a warrior grabs the heart-shaped weapon, a blinding light erupts from the blade. An enormous wave of divine energy explodes outward from the altar, swallowing the entire temple before continuing far beyond it. The shockwave tears across the mountains and even blasts straight through a distant human castle. But that's not the worst part. The weapon's hidden effect activates. Every single demon across the world dies instantly. Every demon except Kratos. Kim still remembers how horrifying that outcome was. While running, he thinks back to his first playthrough. He only collected the Holy Sword once out of curiosity, but since it rewarded absolutely 0 experience points, he never bothered touching it again. Then another realization suddenly stops him in his tracks. Wait. Aged Kimchi already possesses Bragia's holy hammer from the beginning of the game. If that's true, could another legendary weapon still be sitting inside this dungeon? For a brief moment, Kim considers the possibility. But he quickly shakes the thought away. Whether there's a duplicate or not doesn't matter. Surviving the dungeon is already hard enough. Anyone entering still has to overcome every deadly trap waiting inside. Then Kim remembers the final obstacle. The Guardian. His mind flashes to a gigantic armored helmet with a single glowing red eye. The monster protecting the holy sword isn't just another enemy. It's one of the most terrifying bosses in the entire game. Kim immediately pushes himself even harder, desperately hoping the kids haven't wandered inside because there's absolutely nothing good waiting for them there. Meanwhile, inside the ancient temple itself, Malenkov slowly walks through the entrance while carrying the unconscious flute over one shoulder and holding his glowing staff in his free hand. He suddenly stops. His eyes widen in confusion. The hallway ahead should be overflowing with deadly traps. Instead, every spike, every spear, every blade mechanism has already been triggered. The entire corridor looks as though someone passed through before him. Malenkov breaks into a nervous sweat. Who could possibly have done that? The story shifts deeper into the dungeon. Far below, a long spiral staircase descends into complete darkness. At the very bottom lies T-Bone. The tiny blue dragon is collapsed on the cold stone steps, breathing heavily while a faint blue aura flickers around his exhausted body. Every breath looks painful. T-Bone can feel something inside himself becoming increasingly unstable. His body doesn't feel normal anymore. Suddenly another violent surge shakes his tiny frame, making him curl into a ball as though something inside is about to explode. Despite the unbearable pain, he refuses to give up. He quietly encourages himself, believing that if coming this far can protect his dad, mom, uncles, and aunts, then enduring this suffering is completely worth it. Clenching his tiny claws and squeezing his eyes shut, he whispers that he only has to hold on a little longer. Then, a deep, intimidating voice suddenly echoes throughout the dark chamber. It demands to know who dares enter this place. T-Bone's eyes snap open in shock. Towering over the tiny dragon stands an enormous guardian whose massive body completely fills the hallway with its overwhelming presence. Its single crimson eye burns brightly as it announces that anyone seeking Bragia's holy sword must face the consequences. Then it declares its name. It is King Stoma, and it will personally execute the intruder. T-Bone freezes completely. The tiny dragon can only stare upward with trembling eyes and an open mouth as the gigantic boss looms over him, finally realizing just how terrifying the situation has become.
Like, share.
Deep within the ancient stone chamber, the tiny baby blue dragon T-Bone stood frozen on the staircase, trembling from head to toe as the gigantic armored guardian towered above him. His eyes filled with tears as he nervously chirped out his own name, hoping somehow that would explain everything. The towering guardian stared down with its single glowing red eye and asked a simple but intimidating question. If T-Bone wasn't here for Bragia's holy sword, then why had he come all the way into one of the deepest and most dangerous places imaginable? Before T-Bone could even think of an answer, something inside his body suddenly went completely out of control. Blue energy exploded around him. A violent vortex of brilliant light erupted from his tiny body, swirling so powerfully that it lit up the entire chamber. The guardian instinctively recoiled as the magical shockwave blasted across the room. Even someone as ancient and powerful as the guardian couldn't hide his surprise. His glowing eye widened as he stared at the unbelievable transformation happening right in front of him. When the light finally faded, the tiny dragon was gone. Lying face down on the cold stone floor was a pale-skinned person with long white hair. For a few seconds, everything fell silent. The transformed T-Bone slowly opened one bright blue eye and looked around in complete confusion, while the guardian stared down in disbelief before asking whether the little intruder had actually been a human all along. T-Bone slowly sat up, completely speechless. The first thing he noticed wasn't the guardian. It was his own hands. He lifted them in front of his face, staring in complete disbelief before reality finally caught up with him. He immediately started smacking his own cheeks over and over, shouting in total shock as he tried to process what had just happened. Then he looked down at his new body again. His confusion instantly turned into pure excitement. Jumping around on the stone staircase, T-Bone celebrated like a kid who had just gotten the greatest birthday present imaginable. The magic had actually worked. Not only had he transformed into a human, but he even had long white hair just like his dad. Unfortunately, his celebration didn't last very long. The guardian suddenly spoke again. His deep voice echoed through the chamber, making T-Bone freeze so suddenly that he almost forgot how to breathe. He slowly turned back toward the enormous armored figure, whose glowing red eye still looked incredibly intimidating. Thankfully, the guardian wasn't angry. After watching T-Bone for a moment, he calmly admitted that the little visitor didn't seem like a bad person. Since he clearly wasn't after the holy sword, the guardian simply told him to leave while he still could. T-Bone's eyes instantly filled with relief. He bowed so deeply his forehead nearly touched the ground, hurriedly thanking the guardian over and over before turning around and sprinting away through the massive circular corridors as fast as his new legs could carry him. The guardian silently watched him leave. Then, wait. The voice echoed through the hallway. T-Bone stopped so abruptly that he nearly tripped before looking back in surprise. The gigantic guardian suddenly seemed awkward. His enormous body remained as imposing as ever, but his voice completely lost its intimidating confidence. He hesitated, stumbled over his own words, and then, completely out of nowhere, started asking about the outside world. He awkwardly wondered what the weather had been like lately. Then he asked whether the number of living creatures had increased. After another uncomfortable pause, he nervously asked what was popular these days, and whether any wars were happening outside. T-Bone could only stand there blinking. The conversation had become so unbelievably random that he had absolutely no idea how to respond. Then it finally clicked. A huge smile spread across his face. Instead of seeing a terrifying dungeon boss, T-Bone suddenly saw someone who had simply been lonely for a very, very long time. With a cheerful grin, he spread his arms wide and happily asked if the Guardian was just looking for a friend. The enormous Guardian completely froze. Despite wearing layers of heavy armor, he somehow looked unbelievably embarrassed. T-Bone laughed warmly before pointing at himself and introducing himself properly, then happily asked for the Guardian's name in return. After a long, awkward silence, heavy metallic clanks echoed through the chamber. The Guardian slowly removed his massive armor piece by piece while nervously introducing himself. And the reveal was priceless. Instead of some horrifying monster, the legendary Guardian turned out to be an adorable little beaver-like magical creature holding an oversized helmet. His cheeks turned bright red as he shyly introduced himself as King Stoma, the eternal magic beast entrusted with guarding Bragia's holy sword. Meanwhile, outside the dungeon, Kim suddenly came to a stop. Dropping onto one knee, he carefully picked up a torn piece of fabric lying on the rocky ground while aged Kimchi silently watched from behind. The moment Kim recognized it, cold sweat rolled down his face. A memory of Flute instantly flashed through his mind. This wasn't just any piece of cloth. It was Flute's scarf. That realization changed everything. Someone hadn't wandered into the dungeon by accident. Someone had entered with a clear objective. Without wasting another second, Kim shot forward into a full sprint, yelling back for aged Kimchi to hurry before disappearing into the darkness of the cave. Aged Kimchi remained standing for only a brief moment, silently watching Kim vanish into the tunnel. His thoughts grew increasingly heavy. Kim Jangcheol. No. Credos. He was running toward Bragia's holy sword once again in this second life. That thought awakened painful memories. A violent flashback surged through aged Kimchi's mind. He remembered gripping a sword tightly before charging across a battlefield, mercilessly cutting down countless demons one after another. The memories were soaked in blood. At the time, it hadn't even felt like fighting anymore. It had simply become endless slaughter. As those memories continued, another image appeared. A sacred weapon resting quietly upon its pedestal. Aged Kimchi couldn't stop worrying. If another holy sword truly existed inside this dungeon, and if Kim somehow obtained it, would history repeat itself? Almost immediately, he forced himself to reject that thought. No. Things were different now. Back in Dapparakia, Credos had possessed the holy sword before, yet he had never abused its power. He had used it only when absolutely necessary and willingly let it go afterward. That alone proved history wasn't destined to repeat itself. But even as he tried to reassure himself, another memory surfaced. The warning from the god of abundance. Never lower your guard. Credos would eventually become far stronger than anyone imagined. Closing his eyes tightly, aged Kimchi continued running through the cavern, trying to steady his breathing and clear the storm of thoughts racing through his mind. The scene shifts deep underground, following a massive spiral staircase that twists endlessly into a dark abyss. The only sound echoing through the ancient structure is the steady click of footsteps as Malenkov descends one step after another. He grips his staff tightly in one hand while carrying the unconscious Flute over his shoulder, his face locked into a determined scowl. As he continues downward, he tells himself that he's almost reached the deepest level of the dungeon. That's where the Real challenge begins. His expression grows tense as sweat forms on his face. He remembers exactly what's waiting below. King Stoma. The legendary magic beast entrusted with protecting Bragia's holy sword. Instead of feeling intimidated, however, a sinister grin slowly spreads across Malenkov's face. The magic tower hadn't sent him here unprepared. They had devoted enormous time and resources to creating a special weapon specifically designed to kill King Stoma once and for all. In his mind, victory is already within reach. Then, a deafening scream echoes through the chamber. Malenkov instantly freezes. His confident smile disappears as he jerks his head toward the sound, completely baffled by the loud, high-pitched shouting bouncing off the stone walls. Down below, the source of the commotion is revealed. T-Bone is sitting happily on King Stoma's enormous belly with both arms raised high in excitement. Looking around the huge chamber, he excitedly shouts that the place looks just like one giant field of reeds. Meanwhile, the terrifying guardian of the holy sword is doing the exact opposite of what anyone would expect. King Stoma, now revealed in his adorable beaver form, rolls happily across the floor, kicking his tiny paws in the air while laughing so hard that he can barely breathe. Watching the bizarre scene from the staircase, Malenkov can only stare with a strained, sweat-covered face. This fluffy, giggling creature is supposed to be the legendary King Stoma? And more importantly, who is that mysterious white-haired child casually playing with him? While King Stoma continues rolling around in uncontrollable laughter, Malenkov's confusion quickly gives way to opportunity. A wicked smile slowly returns. If the Guardian is completely distracted, then there's no reason to fight at all. He can simply sneak past, claim Bragia's holy sword, and leave before anyone notices. Meanwhile, completely unaware of Malenkov's plan, T-Bone puffs out his cheeks before gathering a huge amount of magical energy. A massive swirling sphere forms in front of him. Watching it grow larger and larger, T-Bone beams with excitement before proudly announcing that he's about to throw a giant snowball. King Stoma immediately lights up. With childlike enthusiasm, he charges straight toward T-Bone, eagerly shouting that he's coming. T-Bone leaps into the air with an excited cry and launches the enormous sphere of magical energy. The blast races across the stone floor before crashing directly into King Stoma's face with an enormous splash. King Stoma lets out a surprised grunt. The instant T-Bone realizes what happened, every bit of excitement vanishes. His face turns pale. Panicking, he grabs his own cheeks as terrifying thoughts race through his head. Had he accidentally hurt his new friend? The atmosphere changes instantly. The chamber grows silent. King Stoma slowly rises. His enormous body casts a massive shadow across the room as his glowing red eye stares directly at T-Bone. T-Bone immediately starts sweating. Stretching both hands forward, he desperately apologizes, stumbling over his words while trying to explain that he never meant to hurt him. For a few agonizing seconds, nothing happens. Then the tension completely collapses. King Stoma suddenly flops onto his back with an embarrassed blush and cheerfully admits that the only reason he got hit was because his little arms were simply too short to catch the giant snowball. Just like that, the terrifying mood disappears. T-Bone's worried face instantly bursts into the biggest smile imaginable as he realizes King Stoma isn't angry at all. The giant magical beast happily rolls around the floor again, laughing just as hard as before. Hidden in the background, Malenkov quietly slips past them, although he can't help looking back with complete disbelief. No matter how closely he listens, King Stoma only keeps making strange bibyong noises, yet somehow T-Bone understands every single thing he's saying. Giving up on trying to understand the absurd friendship unfolding behind him, Malenkov shifts his full attention back to his objective. His eyes sharpen. His grin grows darker. Then he suddenly breaks into a sprint toward a nearby stone archway, convinced that Bragia's holy sword is waiting just beyond it. His excitement barely lasts a second. From high above, Kim spots him. Without hesitation, Kim shouts down to King Stoma that someone is trying to steal the holy sword. Before Malenkov can even react, Kim throws himself down into the chamber, landing heavily with an angry roar that echoes throughout the dungeon. King Stoma's playful expression disappears instantly. His glowing eyes blaze with fury as he turns toward the intruder and releases a thunderous battle roar. In the blink of an eye, the giant guardian's enormous shadow engulfs Malenkov. The confidence that had carried him all this way completely evaporates. Frozen in place beneath the towering beast, Malenkov lets out a horrified scream as he realizes his entire plan has just fallen apart. Subscribe. Comment. King Stoma let out a thunderous roar that shook the entire chamber, his voice making it painfully clear that the intruder wasn't leaving with the holy sword. Malenkov immediately gritted his teeth and forced himself to stay calm. He desperately tried to turn the situation around, shouting that the magic tower had prepared for this exact moment. According to him, they had created special seeds specifically designed to deal with powerful magic beasts like King Stoma. King Stoma didn't care in the slightest. He simply answered with another furious roar and kept charging forward. Seeing there was no time to waste, Malenkov quickly pulled out a slingshot and loaded one of the glowing blue seeds. With a confident shout, he fired it straight toward the charging guardian, yelling for him to swallow it. The projectile flew directly into King Stoma's open mouth before he even realized what had happened. An instant later, the seed activated. A massive explosion of thick white smoke erupted, completely engulfing the giant guardian. Watching the enormous blast consume King Stoma, Kim's face instantly turned pale as he shouted in alarm, while aged Kimchi silently kept his eyes locked on the smoke, carefully watching for what would happen next. As the clouds slowly began to clear, something tiny suddenly shot out of the center of the explosion and bounced across the stone floor. Everyone stared in disbelief. The enormous guardian had been reduced to a tiny, harmless little beaver. Seeing his plan work perfectly, Malenkov burst into loud, triumphant laughter. With the guardian no longer standing in his way, he immediately turned toward the altar and proudly declared that Bragia's holy sword now belonged to the magic tower. Kim's expression changed instantly. He shouted at aged Kimchi to stop him immediately because if that sword was pulled out, every demon would die. Without wasting a second, aged Kimchi exploded into motion. He raced across the stone floor at incredible speed, completely focused on catching Malenkov before he could reach the altar. The chamber opened into the brightly lit sanctuary ahead. Malenkov sprinted straight for the pedestal while aged Kimchi rapidly closed the gap behind him. Kim could only watch as he desperately screamed for him to stop. A wicked grin spread across Malenkov's face as he finally reached the altar. He wrapped his hand around the heart-shaped holy sword just as aged Kimchi came diving in from behind with his blade raised, ready to cut him down before it was too late. The instant Malenkov tightened his grip, an overwhelming surge of power burst from the weapon. Aged Kimchi clenched his teeth and pushed even harder, his speed becoming a blur as he lunged forward. At the same time, Kim charged in with a furious roar. Knowing exactly what that sword could unleash, he didn't try to overpower it. Instead, he raised Lala high into the air and activated concentrated nutrition. Lala's eye lit up brilliantly as an enormous torrent of violet-purple-black energy erupted from the holy sword. Rather than allowing that destructive power to spread, Kim forced Lala to absorb it. The vortex of dark energy was sucked straight into her. Malenkov screamed as the violet pull ripped the holy sword right out of his hands. The stream of corrupted magic kept pouring into Lala until she suddenly let out a loud gulp. Her eye widened in complete disbelief. Then she squeezed it tightly shut, groaning in disgust as if she had just swallowed something unbelievably awful. A second later, Lala couldn't hold it anymore. She gagged violently and belched out a huge cloud of thick purple smoke. With its power interrupted, the ornate heart-shaped holy sword slipped from the air and crashed onto the cold stone floor with a sharp metallic clang. Kim remained standing for only a brief moment. His entire body trembled from exhaustion as he weakly gripped his weapon and let out a tired groan. Then his strength completely gave out. He collapsed heavily onto the stone floor. Seeing him fall, T-Bone gasped in panic, terrified that something had happened to him. Nearby, aged Kimchi also struggled to stay on his feet. He clutched his aching head while sweat rolled down his face, silently staring at the fallen holy sword. A troubling thought crossed his mind. He wondered if the sword had been maliciously exploiting its wielder's immense power all along. A moment later, aged Kimchi looked down from the upper level and spotted movement below. His eyes narrowed. Malenkov was still alive. The mage was desperately running toward the exit while carrying the unconscious flute under one arm. As he fled through the stone corridor, he looked back with pure hatred burning across his face and screamed that nobody should come any closer unless they wanted to see the little girl burned alive. The problem was, Malenkov had absolutely no idea that flute had already woken up. Instead of looking scared, she simply stared at him like he was making a complete fool of himself. Then, without any warning, she casually punched him square in the face. The single hit instantly knocked Malenkov unconscious. Sometime later, he slowly came to with a painful groan. His face was bruised, his entire body ached, and before he could even react, he realized he had been completely tied up with thick ropes. Then someone stepped into his view. Kim stood directly in front of him, staring down with a cold expression. The next moment, Kim's face twisted into a terrifying demonic glare. His crimson eyes glowed intensely, his fangs were fully exposed, and his overwhelming presence alone was enough to make the air feel heavy. With a frightening smile, Kim asked if they could finally have a nice, calm conversation. Malenkov froze on the spot. His entire body shook uncontrollably as sweat poured down his face, realizing he was completely at Kim's mercy. Back at the campsite, things finally settled down after all the chaos in the dungeon. Artani stood completely frozen, staring at the long white-haired boy in front of her. Even behind her mask, it was obvious she was struggling to process what she was seeing. After a long moment, she cautiously asked if he was really T-Bone. The boy simply smiled and gave a gentle nod while cradling a tiny beaver in his arms. Still trying to wrap her head around everything, Artanis leaned in to get a better look at the little creature and curiously asked who he was. T-Bone happily introduced him as King Stoma. He explained that King Stoma had been trapped inside the dungeon for such a long time that he had forgotten most of his past. Right on cue, the little beaver energetically squeaked, letting out an excited Beyond. Without missing a beat, T-Bone cheerfully translated for him. According to King Stoma, Artanis was incredibly pretty. That innocent translation instantly caught Artanis completely off guard. She blushed bright red beneath her mask and shyly thanked the little beaver, clearly embarrassed by the unexpected compliment. Unfortunately for her, T-Bone wasn't finished. With complete innocence, he happily added that since Artanis was so close to Dad, that obviously made her mom now. Artanis immediately went into full panic mode. Flustered beyond belief, she hurriedly denied it, waving her hands around as she insisted that T-Bone absolutely should not say things like that, especially where Credos might hear them. Watching the whole exchange, King Stoma couldn't stop giggling. T-Bone tilted his head in confusion and innocently asked why that was such a problem. Before Artanis could somehow dig herself out of that incredibly awkward conversation, aged Kimchi walked over and unintentionally rescued her by changing the subject. He calmly asked whether Credos was still tied up in the meeting. As T-Bone happily played nearby with King Stoma, Artanis let out a quiet sigh before commenting that the whole situation surrounding the dungeon was going to be much harder to deal with than she originally thought. After a brief pause, her attention shifted toward the mysterious weapon. Looking at aged Kimchi, she asked whether another weapon exactly like his really existed inside that dungeon and wondered if it was truly as special as everyone claimed. Aged Kimchi didn't answer right away. He quietly looked away, clearly weighing his words. After a moment of silence, he finally opened his mouth, hesitating as he slowly began to explain. But before he could get very far, the artifact suddenly reacted on its own. Brilliant, colorful magic burst from it as its eyes slowly opened. Despite activating so dramatically, the artifact remained completely silent, offering no explanation at all. Meanwhile, back inside the hut, the discussion had shifted to a much more serious topic. Hartok addressed everyone gathered around the table and summarized what they had learned so far. According to the information they had, the Magic Tower had been cooperating with the human kingdom through agricultural projects, and the staff they were after played an important role in improving farming productivity. Kim confirmed that this matched everything he had managed to learn from Malenkov. Kim admitted that the prisoner simply didn't know many details. In fact, after Kim gave him one particularly intimidating glare, the poor guy immediately fainted. Even using blood eye afterward hadn't uncovered anything more useful. Hartok frowned, realizing how troublesome the situation had become. Since the Magic Tower already had active ties with the kingdom, whatever happened next had the potential to create a major diplomatic problem. Hartok's warning left the room feeling heavy, but Kim reacted completely differently. Instead of looking worried, he casually rested a hand on his chin and let out a small, confident chuckle. With a smug grin spreading across his face, he asked what was supposed to be so complicated about this situation. From his perspective, everything had actually worked out in their favor. Then his smile grew even wider. His sharp fangs showed as he burst into a mischievous laugh, and his eyes gleamed with the kind of look that made everyone realize he had already started plotting something. Kim declared that if the Magic Tower wanted to send people onto demon territory, attack one of their children, trespass into a forbidden dungeon, and nearly trigger a catastrophe, then they were absolutely responsible for the damage they had caused. And since the Magic Tower was famous for possessing all kinds of valuable resources and useful inventions, he had no intention of letting them walk away for free. With an almost villain-like grin, Kim announced that he was simply going to file a claim for damages and make sure they paid up, fully intending to collect plenty of useful compensation from the Magic Tower. Subscribe. Comment. Far away at the desolate edge of the continent, a massive castle stood quietly beneath the pale glow of the full moon. Deep inside the Sanctuary of Mages, at the Magic Tower of Abundance, the atmosphere was anything but peaceful. Giovanni, the head of the tower, stood with a stern expression, making it clear that obtaining Bragia's holy sword was their highest priority. One of the hooded mages tried to reassure him by saying Malenkov was the fastest among them, so he was confident the mission would succeed. Giovanni, however, refused to rely on optimism alone. If Malenkov failed to return, they needed another plan ready immediately. He then revealed the real objective behind everything. The Holy Sword wasn't simply a powerful artifact. With it, the Magic Tower intended to produce such an overwhelming harvest that they could monopolize the kingdom's food supply. Once they controlled the food, controlling the kingdom itself would only be a matter of time. Before anyone could respond, the meeting exploded into chaos. A terrified Malenkov suddenly crashed straight through the tower's glass window, screaming as he tumbled across the floor and slid past the stunned mages. Giovanni froze in disbelief, barely able to process what had happened before a calm, polite voice greeted him from the broken window. Standing beneath the moonlight was Kim, confidently introducing himself as Demon Lord Kratos. Beside him stood aged Kimchi, while Artanis quietly hovered outside in her winged cat form, calmly watching everything unfold. The tower immediately erupted into panic. The mages screamed that the demons had invaded and instantly conjured blazing fireballs before launching them at the intruders. Aged Kimchi didn't even bother dodging. He simply stepped forward and casually swatted every incoming spell away with his bare hands as though they were nothing more than annoying sparks. Giovanni watched in horror. These weren't weak spells, they had been cast by high-ranking mages. Yet this mysterious man ignored them completely. Realizing ordinary magic wouldn't work, Giovanni hurriedly gathered magical energy, but before he could finish, aged Kimchi made his move. A gigantic sword descended from above like a falling meteor. It tore straight through the middle of the Magic Tower, slicing past Giovanni's carefully prepared defensive barrier as though it didn't even exist. The impact sent violent shockwaves throughout the chamber, reducing the mages to terrified screams while dust and debris filled the room. Giovanni couldn't even move. Kim calmly stepped forward, shadows covering his eyes, and explained the situation in the simplest possible terms. If a real fight started here, aged Kimchi alone would be enough to wipe out the entire Magic Tower. Giovanni's panic only deepened. The terrifying warrior wasn't even dressed like someone normal, yet he possessed completely overwhelming strength. Seeing the old man's spirit already breaking, Kim smiled and suggested they skip the fighting altogether and settle things with a civilized conversation instead. Not having any better options, Giovanni reluctantly accepted. Outside, Artanis quietly remained on the balcony beneath the moon while the negotiations began inside. Kim leaned comfortably into a luxurious chair, crossed one leg over the other, and casually asked Giovanni whether the Magic Tower had been trying to steal something from demon territory. Giovanni immediately denied everything, insisting he had no idea what Kim was talking about. Kim only smiled wider. He explained that he wasn't asking because he needed information. He already knew the truth because he had read Malenkov's mind. Giovanni instantly rejected the claim. Mind-reading magic like that didn't exist in any spellbook. Kim casually agreed. Of course it wasn't in any spellbook. Then his expression suddenly changed. His blood eye activated. One of Kim's eyes glowed blood red as tears immediately began streaming down his face. Giovanni completely panicked. He couldn't tell whether Kim was actually reading his mind or simply trying to intimidate him. At the same time, he couldn't understand why someone who looked so terrifying was suddenly crying. Meanwhile, a system interface informed Kim that Giovanni's mind was in complete chaos. His thoughts had become so unstable that it was difficult to extract useful information because Kim's completely unpredictable behavior had thrown him into total confusion. Ignoring the tears pouring from his eye, Kim continued digging deeper into Giovanni's memories, determined to discover why the magic tower wanted the holy sword so badly. Then everything suddenly stopped. Without warning, the eye of the god of abundance flared open inside Giovanni's mind. The system itself reacted with shock. The terrifying vision startled Kim so badly that he literally jumped backward in his chair, clutching his chest while yelling that it had scared the life out of him. Giovanni simply stared at him in complete confusion. The system awkwardly apologized, joking that Kim's reaction was basically PTSD kicking in. The humor didn't last long. A series of warning messages immediately appeared, informing Kim that continuing any deeper would be extremely dangerous because an unimaginably powerful existence was interfering with the mind-reading process. Kim nervously asked whether that mysterious being was even stronger than the system itself. The answer was unsettling. The system admitted it belonged to the normal side of existence. Whatever Kim had just witnessed was something entirely different, an existence from outside the universe itself. It possessed power beyond even hell or the celestial realm. That revelation immediately changed Kim's thinking. For a brief moment, he wondered whether making enemies of the magic tower was actually a terrible idea. Fortunately, the system quickly clarified the situation. The cosmic existence wasn't truly backing the magic tower. It merely had some influence over it. The moment Kim heard that, his confidence returned. If the magic tower didn't actually have that unimaginable entity protecting it, then everything was still proceeding exactly as he wanted. Giovanni cautiously asked what Kim actually wanted. He also argued that even if they had tried taking the holy sword, it wasn't Kim's property to begin with. Kim waved that argument away. He admitted nobody even knew how long the sword had been sitting there. That wasn't what bothered him. His expression suddenly darkened. The real problem was that Giovanni's subordinate had attacked a little demon child. Giovanni finally lost his patience. He shouted that both sides had already caused damage. Kim's group had beaten Malenkov nearly to death, so weren't they even now? Kim acted completely offended. He pointed out that things almost were even, until the magic tower immediately attacked his group again the moment they arrived. Giovanni grabbed his head in frustration. Trying to argue with Kim felt like arguing with an old lover who refused to let go of every tiny mistake from the past. Ignoring the complaint, Kim calmly explained that maintaining trade between the demons and the kingdom benefited both sides. Starting a diplomatic conflict over the actions of a few subordinates simply wasn't profitable. Then he smiled. Since the magic tower had fired exactly 2 spells at his group, he only wanted 2 things in return. Hand them over, and everyone could pretend nothing had happened. Giovanni forced a painfully strained smile before finally exploding in anger, demanding how a demon lord could casually threaten the magic tower like this. Behind Kim, aged Kimchi slowly reached for his sword and calmly asked if he should just kill Giovanni instead. Kim immediately raised a finger, stopping him. He gave Giovanni one final chance to make the smart decision. The demons could survive perfectly fine without trade, and if necessary, 6 of them were enough to erase the entire magic tower from existence. So Giovanni should stop thinking emotionally and start thinking about profit. Finally cornered, Giovanni asked what Kim wanted. Kim revealed his first demand. The Summer Flame, the magic tower's treasured sacred artifact. Then came the second request. The sunflower seeds specially designed to exterminate magical beasts. Giovanni was genuinely confused. How did Kim even know those treasures existed? More importantly, those were the only 2 things he wanted? Thinking he was getting away cheaply, Giovanni quickly agreed. Kim immediately burst into an excited grin and declared the negotiations complete. Then he loudly called out for Whitey to do his job. Outside, a gigantic stone statue suddenly came to life. Standing proudly on its shoulder was T-Bone, whose earlier scouting mission finally made sense. Kim had secretly sent him ahead to locate the tower's treasure storage long before the negotiations even began. The enormous statue marched behind the storage building, wrapped both hands around the entire warehouse, and ripped the whole building straight out of the ground. It effortlessly lifted the massive structure onto its shoulder as if it were carrying a small travel bag. Giovanni's eyes nearly burst out of his head. He screamed that Kim had only asked for 2 items, so why was he stealing the entire warehouse? Kim looked back innocently. He calmly told Giovanni to think carefully about his exact words. He had asked for 2 things. For now. He had never said those would be the only things he intended to take. Giovanni could only clutch his chest in utter frustration. Somehow, despite being a demon lord, Kim's greatest weapon wasn't overwhelming violence. It was shamelessly twisting every negotiation completely in his own favor.
Like, share.
As the sun sets over the mountains, King Stoma and T-Bone are already outside having the time of their lives. The little beaver lets out an excited cry before charging across the open field with a huge golden ball tucked under his arm, then hurls it toward T-Bone with incredible force. T-Bone doesn't even flinch. He confidently catches the speeding ball in midair, strikes a dramatic pose like he's the hero of a sports anime, then yells as he slams it right back across the field. King Stoma instantly dashes after it, catches it without missing a beat, and proudly celebrates before tossing it back again. The two keep the game going, happily throwing the ball back and forth like they've been best friends forever. Then T-Bone suddenly freezes after remembering something important. Unfortunately, King Stoma has already thrown the ball, and it smacks T-Bone square in the face. T-Bone falls flat on his back while King Stoma rushes over, probably thinking he just scored the greatest point of his life. Luckily, T-Bone pops right back up, brushes himself off, and explains that he has to go monitor the Razor Winds. Without wasting another second, he flies off into the sky. King Stoma watches him disappear until he's nothing but a tiny dot in the distance. His excitement fades almost instantly, and the little beaver is left standing there all alone. His eyes slowly fill with tears before he quietly walks back toward the camp. Inside the hut, King Stoma curls up by himself in a little straw nest tucked into the corner. The loneliness brings back painful memories of his countless years trapped inside the dungeon, sitting alone in that enormous stone chamber with nothing but his armor and silence for company. The memory shakes him so badly that he gasps and snaps back to reality. Not wanting to feel that loneliness again, King Stoma quickly runs outside and looks for something, anything, to do. His first stop is Flute, who is busy working in the fields with a small shovel. She looks at him in confusion when he eagerly offers to help. Instead of putting him to work, she gently smiles and tells him that after being trapped inside a dungeon for so long, he deserves to rest instead. He tries again with Hartok, but Hartok gives the same answer. Looking down at the tiny beaver, he says there simply isn't any reason for him to push himself, especially since everyone already has the work under control. Zephyros joins in as well, reminding King Stoma that he isn't one of their soldiers or subordinates. He's free to enjoy himself, relax, or even spend time playing with Artanis instead of worrying about work. Even though everyone means well, that's exactly the problem. King Stoma slowly walks away with his head hanging low. He quietly admits to himself that he already knows he's too small to be much help, but that's not why he wanted a job in the first place. He simply doesn't want to be alone anymore. Just then, someone calls his name. King Stoma looks up to see Ball towering over him. Ball mentions that he heard the little beaver has been asking Hartok for work. The nervous beaver gives a tiny squeak in response. Ball bluntly points out that, because of his size, King Stoma probably won't be much help with heavy farm labor. The honest comment immediately crushes the little guy's spirits. But before King Stoma can get too discouraged, Ball calmly adds that farming isn't the only kind of work around here. Those words instantly bring the sparkle back to King Stoma's eyes. A little later, Ball brings him over to one of the rice fields where several demons are stomping through the muddy ridges. Ball explains that compacting the ridges keeps the fields in good condition, but it's exhausting work that has to be repeated over and over. King Stoma sadly mumbles that he's probably too tiny to help with something like that. Ball immediately shakes his head and explains that walking the ridges isn't King Stoma's job at all. Instead, he points towards Sergei and Azurat, who are completely wiped out after working in the mud. Both of them are sprawled across the ground, barely able to move. Ball casually teases 2 of the 4 great heavenly demon generals for collapsing after doing such simple work, instantly triggering an angry shouting match as the exhausted pair protest his comment. Completely unfazed, Ball casually explains that he's actually too heavy to do the job himself because he'd destroy the ridges with every step anyway, which only makes Sergei even more annoyed. Then, with a perfectly serious expression, Ball gently picks up the tiny King Stoma and places him in front of the exhausted Sergei. He calmly tells her to give the little beaver a touch. Sergei immediately recoils, nervously asking whether this mysterious magic beast bites and wondering why she's supposed to touch him in the first place. Ignoring every bit of her hesitation, Ball simply reaches over and starts squishing King Stoma's soft, fluffy cheeks from side to side like he's squeezing a piece of mochi, demonstrating exactly what he means. Ball demonstrates his brilliant little idea by gently squishing King Stoma's incredibly fluffy cheeks over and over. The tiny beaver's face stretches like the world's softest plush toy, and Sergei just freezes in complete disbelief at how unbelievably adorable the sight is. A moment later, Sergei carefully picks King Stoma up in her arms. Almost instantly, all the stress melts off her face. She smiles with teary eyes as an overwhelming sense of comfort washes over her, wondering what this strange, soothing feeling even is. Somehow, all the exhaustion from working in the fields disappears in an instant. Seeing everyone's confused expressions, Ball explains the phenomenon with complete seriousness. According to him, it's simply the fidget toy effect. The soft tactile stimulation reduces stress and lowers cortisol, making people feel relaxed. The explanation is so oddly scientific that even Azurat just stares at him, completely baffled by where that lecture came from. Once the others notice how refreshed Sergei looks, they immediately swarm around King Stoma. Everyone starts asking for a turn to squeeze the adorable little beaver. Sergei instantly hugs him closer and firmly orders everyone to get back to work first. If they want a turn, they can finish their assigned quota before getting in line. Eventually, one of the afro-haired demons earns his chance. He happily squishes King Stoma's soft cheeks while the surrounding demons cheer him on like he just won a prize. At first, King Stoma doesn't really understand why everyone suddenly wants to squeeze his face. But as he looks around at all the smiling demons laughing together, something quietly clicks inside him. He slowly relaxes, leans back with a peaceful smile, and realizes that for the first time in an incredibly long time, he isn't alone anymore. Just then, a sharp swishing sound slices through the air. Everyone instinctively looks up in surprise. High above them, Whitey appears carrying an enormous clocktower-like building over his head. Excited voices immediately spread through the camp as everyone realizes the demon lord has finally returned. Whitey marches confidently across the rocky ground before slamming the massive structure down with a thunderous crash that shakes the entire area. Standing proudly beside aged Kimchi, Kim raises his voice and calls for everyone's attention. Once the crowd falls silent, he proudly announces that this building will officially become the Demon Lord's new castle. The moment those words leave his mouth, the entire camp erupts into deafening cheers. Whitey kneels proudly beside the newly acquired tower while the demons celebrate their brand new headquarters. Watching from the crowd, Froki and Branda are completely dumbfounded. They immediately recognize the building as part of the magic tower and can't even begin to figure out how Kim somehow managed to bring the entire thing back. Before anyone can ask further questions, T-Bone comes soaring through the sky with King Stoma riding along. Kim smiles as soon as he sees them and warmly thanks T-Bone for remembering to bring their newest friend back. As T-Bone hovers nearby, Kim turns his attention toward King Stoma and gently asks whether being trapped inside that dungeon alone for so many years had been lonely. The little beaver quietly nods. Kim's expression softens before a familiar mischievous smile returns. He asks King Stoma if he'd like to officially become part of the demon community while helping everyone with farming. King Stoma tilts his head for a moment before eagerly nodding without hesitation. Kim then pulls out a special red seed and explains that the blue seed shrank him earlier, but this one has the exact opposite effect. If King Stoma eats it, he'll return to his gigantic original size. With a grin, Kim points toward the mountain ridges and tells him that once he's big again, he can help maintain the fields by treading the ridges with his enormous feet. King Stoma's eyes sparkle with excitement as he eagerly nods again. All around them, Hartok and the other demons stare in stunned disbelief. Then, with complete confidence, Kim proudly announces to everyone that the eternal magic beast, King Stoma, has officially joined the ranks of the demons.
Like, share.
The white flag flutters gently, as Kim stands proudly in front of the enormous tower, with aged Kimchi and Artanis behind him. Looking up at the towering structure, Kim crosses his arms and lets out a satisfied laugh, clearly feeling like he has accomplished something magnificent. But aged Kimchi isn't nearly as confident. He looks up at the building with a worried expression and points out the obvious problem: the entire tower is basically just stuck in the ground. If the foundation gives way, the whole thing could collapse. Kim, of course, isn't worried in the slightest. Instead, he casually points toward Artanis as though he has already solved the problem, confidently declaring that they have their strongest demon right there. Artanis immediately points at herself in disbelief. She has absolutely no idea why she is suddenly involved in construction work, but Kim explains his brilliant plan: she just needs to hold onto the tower with her clothes so it doesn't fall over. Artanis stares at him like he has completely lost his mind, and asks whether he expects her to do that continuously. Kim's answer is somehow even worse. Apparently, she can stop when she's eating. Artanis' eye twitches behind her mask as she protests that she has an actual life too. Kim, completely failing to understand the problem, points out that she is the strongest demon, so why would she need a private life? That finally pushes Artanis over the edge. She angrily demands to know what her strength has to do with her having a personal life in the first place. Even Kim begins to realize that maybe his idea went a little too far. He awkwardly wonders if perhaps he was being unreasonable, while T-Bone and King Stoma both stare at him and seem to agree that, yes, he absolutely was. T-Bone even starts buzzing angrily around Kim's head, making his opinion very clear, while King Stoma remains perched nearby. Kim eventually gives in, scratching the back of his head as he awkwardly apologizes to Artanis for being a little too harsh. And Artanis doesn't stay angry. Instead, her expression softens as she tells Kim that it's fine. She actually finds it endearing that he thinks through every possible option for the sake of the demons, even if some of those ideas are completely ridiculous. That catches Kim completely off guard. His eyes widen, his cheeks turn bright pink, and suddenly the demon lord who was just arguing about construction starts getting strangely nervous. Even T-Bone seems to notice the sudden change in atmosphere, hovering nearby with an extremely satisfied expression, as if he knows exactly what just happened. Then King Stoma suddenly starts excitedly squeaking, and Kim turns toward T-Bone in confusion, asking what the little beaver's trying to say. T-Bone immediately takes off from Kim's shoulder, flying upward. As a massive burst of glowing light suddenly erupts around him, the intense flash is so bright that Kim has to turn his face away and shield his eyes from the sudden brilliance. And before Kim can even complain, T-Bone transforms into his human-like form and cheerfully explains what King Stoma was trying to say. The little beaver wants to help support the castle. Kim immediately rejects the idea. King Stoma already has work to do with the rice farming, and besides, his enormous original body would be far too heavy. If he tried to support the castle himself, he could actually cause the ground to collapse. That is also why Whitey can't simply be used for the job. Then Kim turns his attention to T-Bone. He tells him that his magic is simply too noisy and flashy, so if he wants to help, he needs to keep things simple. T-Bone instantly returns to his tiny blue dragon form and happily agrees. Kim gives him an approving look and praises him for listening, adding that flashy effects are just a waste of energy anyway. And naturally, the system has something to say about that. A blue system window suddenly appears out of nowhere and practically shouts at Kim, demanding to know if he was the one responsible for that comment. Kim nearly jumps out of his skin. He complains that the system always appears without warning and scares him half to death. The system, apparently offended by Kim's attitude toward flashy effects, argues that amazing visual effects can be the spice of life. Kim is completely baffled by how personally the system seems to be taking this and asks why it is suddenly so angry about effects. The system promptly changes the subject. It announces that, regardless of that argument, it will help Kim deal with the foundation of the Demon Lord's castle. Kim pauses at that. He didn't expect the mysterious messenger to actually know anything about construction, so he asks if the system seriously understands this kind of work. The answer is unsettlingly confident. The system claims that it knows construction extremely well, almost to a sickening degree. Kim can only stare at the glowing blue window in silence. He then brings up something that has been bothering him for a while. He thought the system was merely a messenger, so why is it suddenly taking an active role in helping them? The system gives him the most suspiciously unhelpful answer possible. That's simply the kind of messenger it is. Kim immediately recognizes the dodge and internally complains that the system has avoided answering his question yet again. Still, there isn't much time to argue, because the system immediately announces that it is time to begin the foundation work. Following its instructions, they first move the tower to the temporary location where the castle will eventually stand. Before they can properly secure it, the ground itself needs to be prepared. That's where King Stoma and Whitey come in. The two enormous workers begin stomping and compressing the ground, making sure the soil beneath the future castle is firm enough to support the massive structure. As the work continues, Kim looks down at the two different sunflower seeds in his hand, a red one and a blue one. He had originally considered using the red seeds to enlarge the demons and have them handle the construction themselves, but he realizes there's a problem. The red seeds aren't simply an enlargement tool, they return creatures to their original size. The blue seeds can shrink creatures, but there isn't really any reason to make the demons smaller right now. So that plan is abandoned, and they continue with good old-fashioned construction work. Once the ground is properly prepared, the giant tower is driven deep into the hardened earth. Boom! The massive structure crashes down into place, sending a huge cloud of dust rolling across the area. But simply planting the tower isn't enough. The base still needs to be reinforced, so King Stoma and Whitey start hauling enormous rocks over to the foundation. They carefully pack the large stones around the tower, filling the biggest gaps first. Then they add smaller stones to fill the spaces between those rocks, followed by even smaller stones to make the foundation tighter. Finally, they pour sand into the remaining gaps, packing everything down until there is practically no empty space left. Piece by piece, the rough foundation becomes solid and smooth. After all that work, the gigantic tower is finally standing securely on a proper stone foundation instead of being stuck into the ground like someone just dropped it there and hoped for the best. King Stoma and Whitey look at their finished work with satisfaction. Then the two construction workers celebrate with a massive high five. Clap. Meanwhile, T-Bone stares at the finished foundation in complete amazement, speechless at what King Stoma and Whitey just accomplished. Kim points at the system window and admits that, for a so-called chatterbox, it has actually been pretty helpful, promising to repay it someday. The system immediately cuts him off, saying there's no need for that. If Kim really wants to repay it, he just needs to complete his task. Kim happily accepts the deal, declaring that the castle is taken care of and it's time to get back to his real job. And apparently, that job now includes giving farming lectures. Kim immediately turns toward Hartak and asks him about the next step in growing their rice, promoting tillering. Hartak adjusts his monocle and admits that he has never actually harvested rice before, so he has no idea what it means. Kim looks almost offended that Hartak would make the Demon Lord explain something he thought Hartak would already know. Ball, however, sees this as a positive sign. He calmly explains that Hartak has grown more confident, meaning he can now openly admit when he doesn't know something. Hartak doesn't really understand what Ball means, but decides to call it intellectual humility and move on. Kim immediately gets frustrated because somehow his simple farming lesson has turned into a philosophical discussion. Then Serdi suddenly throws all 6 hands into the air, desperately volunteering to answer. Kim tells her to raise only one hand because 6 of them are way too distracting, but Serdi ignores that and starts guessing anyway. Since tillering sounds like something being divided, she figures it must mean splitting the rice into more pieces. Surprisingly, she's almost right. Kim admits that her explanation is a little disgusting, but the basic idea is correct, and Serdi immediately celebrates her victory. T-Bone flies over and rewards her with a little praise sticker slapped onto her helmet. That tiny sticker is apparently all Serdi needs to completely lose her mind with happiness, while the others cheer her on. Meanwhile, T-Bone quietly watches everyone and starts thinking about how all of them have friends like each other, while he is the only dragon around. It's a small, lonely thought in the middle of all the chaos. Kim quickly brings everyone's attention back and announces that they're entering educational comic mode. Hartak has absolutely no idea what that means, but Kim tells him to just listen. He then explains the rice's growth process. First comes the rooting stage, when the roots settle after transplantation. After that is the early growth stage, where the leaves and stems become stronger. Their rice is currently at this stage. The next stage is where things get interesting, tillering. This is when additional stems begin growing from the same root, allowing one rice plant to produce many more stalks. Kim's goal is to accelerate that process so they can eventually get a much better harvest. To make that happen, they need to control 2 things, the depth of the water and its temperature. The water depth isn't a problem because they can simply drain the paddies when necessary, so the real challenge is keeping the water at the right temperature. Hartak immediately understands the problem. If they tried using something as powerful as Ikart's fire, they'd have no way of maintaining the delicate temperature the rice actually needs. And that's exactly when Kim remembers something he brought back from the magic tower. With a mischievous grin, Kim reveals the glowing red gemstone known as the Summer Flame, proudly describing it as something he received as a token of reconciliation from the magic tower. Which is technically a very polite way of describing something he basically plundered from them. The system identifies Summer Flame as an ancient sacred treasure that was once kept by the human magic tower. It supposedly possesses enough power to burn the earth itself, although nobody knows how to unlock its true potential. Kim, however, isn't particularly impressed. Back when he was playing the game, Summer Flame wasn't all that useful. Its power only increased slightly depending on how much it was charged, so he mostly used it as a long-range attack when he was still low level. But now, that weak little flame has exactly the kind of power Kim needs. Because if all he wants is to gently warm the water in the rice paddies, he doesn't need some gigantic destructive fire attack. That modest amount of heat is actually perfect for encouraging tillering. Kim holds Summer Flame over the field and activates it, sending a steady stream of heat into the flooded paddies. At first, he seems pleased with himself. Then reality hits. He realizes that he would have to walk around the entire rice field manually maintaining the temperature, which sounds incredibly tedious. So Kim immediately starts looking for someone else who can handle the job. And then he looks at T-Bone. Since T-Bone is an ice dragon, Kim figures he should naturally be sensitive to temperature, meaning he ought to be perfect for monitoring the heat. Kim tosses Summer Flame toward him and happily tells T-Bone that he's counting on him. T-Bone hovers over the glowing gemstone, staring at it with absolutely no idea what he's supposed to do. Then the gemstone starts sizzling. Kim notices the problem a little too late. T-Bone? The sizzling rapidly intensifies, and before Kim can react, Summer Flame suddenly erupts with an enormous burst of heat. A massive explosion tears across the field, engulfing T-Bone in flames. Kim's expression instantly changes from confident farmer to terrified dragon parent as he reaches toward the blast and screams T-Bone's name. He rushes through the smoke, completely frustrated because none of this ever happened when Summer Flame was an item in the game. As far as Kim knew, he was simply using a weak fire artifact to warm some water. But apparently, the world has decided to add another hidden event to his farming simulator. A blue system window suddenly appears and announces that another hidden event has occurred. Kim freezes. The system explains that Summer Flame has resonated after encountering Ice Dragon Tyrannus, causing the sacred treasure to reveal its true form. And as the smoke begins clearing, a small silhouette appears. The system identifies it as the Flame Dragon. Then comes the final revelation, Calidus has awakened from the seal. Kim stares at the scene in complete disbelief as a tiny red dragon emerges from the smoke, looking completely unimpressed with everything happening around it. And somehow, it is sitting directly on top of T-Bone, who is lying face down on the ground completely unconscious, tongue hanging out. Kim can only stare at the ridiculous scene in front of him. After everything he thought he knew about Summer Flame, all it took was putting it near T-Bone to awaken a sealed flame dragon. Kim's only response is a completely bewildered, "Huh?" Subscribe. Comment. The newly established Demon Lord's castle now stood proudly against the horizon, its towering structure finally secured in place with a flag fluttering peacefully above it. Sitting nearby on a wooden table, however, was a much smaller presence demanding everyone's attention, the newly awakened red dragon. Calidus sat there with half-lidded eyes, giving Kim the coldest, most unimpressed stare imaginable while letting out a short, sharp chirp that practically screamed, "Don't bother me." Kim rubbed his chin thoughtfully as Zephyros and Artanis watched from behind. After everything that had happened recently, he figured there wasn't much point being surprised anymore. T-Bone's existence had already gone completely off-script compared to the game he remembered, so another unexpected dragon showing up was apparently just another normal day. Instead of worrying about it, Kim's brain immediately shifted into farming mode. Since they still needed someone to help regulate the paddy field's water temperature, this little fire dragon had appeared at the perfect time. If he could somehow win her over, pairing her with T-Bone would solve their biggest farming problem. With that optimistic plan in mind, Kim leaned closer to the tiny dragon and greeted her as casually as possible. He guessed her nickname was Karong and, since T-Bone was still unconscious, suggested the two of them get acquainted while talking about the farm. Unfortunately, Calidus had absolutely no interest in making friends. Before Kim could even finish his sentence, the tiny dragon lunged forward and smacked him square in the face. Kim tumbled backward across the floor clutching his face in agony while Zephyros calmly commented that dragons were naturally violent creatures. T-Bone was the strange exception, not the rule, so Kim should have been more careful. Kim immediately exploded at him, demanding to know why he hadn't warned him sooner. Without changing his expression, Zephyros simply replied that he honestly hadn't expected Kim to shove his face directly in front of an unfamiliar dragon. Meanwhile, Calidus sat back down looking completely satisfied with herself, letting out another smug little chirp. Rubbing his aching face, Kim realized this was going to be far harder than raising T-Bone had been. That little dragon had practically decided Kim was his father the moment they met, but this one clearly wasn't interested in becoming part of the family. Still refusing to give up, Kim tried the universal solution to almost every problem, food. Holding out a plate piled high with freshly cooked corn, he nervously smiled and encouraged Calidus to try some, insisting it was delicious. The tiny dragon responded by launching herself like a missile straight into Kim's chest. The impact blasted him backward while the plate of corn flew through the air. Before he could recover, Calidus darted around him, repeatedly slamming into him from every direction until Kim was left crouching on the floor in complete defeat. Watching the embarrassing spectacle, Artanis calmly explained that dragons were an incredibly proud race. Trying to win one over with snacks was never going to work. Believing proper respect might produce better results, Artanis stepped forward herself. She knelt respectfully before Calidus while gently holding the sleeping T-Bone in her arms, introducing herself politely as one of the demons and offering formal greetings to the great dragon. Calidus's answer was even more aggressive than before. She immediately started attacking both Kim and Artanis, battering them until the two demon lords ended up lying side by side on the ground groaning in pain. Zephyros quietly observed the scene while writing notes into his journal. Completely serious, he read aloud that the former demon lord and the current demon lord were lying next to each other, twisting around on the floor. Kim and Artanis instantly shouted at him to stop making it sound so misleading, while Artanis couldn't believe he was still taking notes during all this chaos. In the middle of their argument, Calidus suddenly made her move. She swooped down, grabbed the still unconscious T-Bone by his tail, and immediately flew away. Artanis gasped in shock. Kim's expression changed instantly from annoyance to pure panic. He scrambled to his feet and sprinted after her at full speed, screaming for Calidus to stop before she disappeared with T-Bone. The chase erupted across the fields as Calidus sped overhead carrying the helpless blue dragon. She flew so quickly that Azurat and the other workers could only stare in complete confusion as she shot past them. Realizing he couldn't catch a dragon by himself, Kim shouted for the four great heavenly demon generals, declaring they had a T-Bone kidnapper on the loose and ordering everyone to capture her immediately. Sergi was the first to respond. She charged forward at incredible speed, yelling furiously as she tried to intercept the escaping dragon. Calidus twisted through the air like a spinning tornado and effortlessly dodged the attack without slowing down. Azurat immediately took his turn, swinging with all his strength as Calidus zipped right past him as well. Then Ball launched himself into the air to cut off her escape. Instead, Calidus crashed directly into him. The collision exploded with tremendous force, sending Ball flying backward through the air. Somehow, instead of complaining about getting hit, Ball calmly announced that he had apparently been kidnapped too. Seeing every peaceful attempt fail, Artanis finally decided she had no choice but to use force. Her enchanted clothing erupted into countless dark tendrils that whipped upward through the sky, chasing after Calidus with incredible speed. Calidus danced effortlessly between every attack, weaving around the massive cloth whips while still carrying T-Bone without missing a beat. The tendrils twisted together overhead into an enormous decorative flower made entirely of elegant ribbons. Artanis admired her accidental masterpiece with genuine satisfaction. Kim looked up at the giant ribbon flower in complete disbelief and shouted, asking what exactly was supposed to be pretty when their dragon was escaping. Grinding his teeth, Kim realized the situation had gone too far. He absolutely couldn't let T-Bone disappear. Thinking quickly, he called for Aged Kimchi. Aged Kimchi shot into the sky like a rocket, racing ahead of Calidus before suddenly appearing directly in front of her to block her path. Calidus froze in surprise. From the ground, Kim hurriedly yelled that Aged Kimchi absolutely wasn't allowed to hurt her. He only wanted her subdued safely. Aged Kimchi blinked blankly. He hovered there in complete silence, clearly unable to process what subdue without hurting was supposed to mean. Watching the scene, Kim nearly burst into tears. He cursed himself for teaching Aged Kimchi nothing except how to destroy things, then immediately admitted that was entirely his own fault. Just then, inspiration struck. Kim's eyes lit up as he suddenly remembered one of his farming abilities. Without wasting another second, he sprinted forward and activated his skill. A massive golden portal ripped open high above the battlefield as he summoned his enormous farming tool set. Moments later, the gigantic wooden equipment cart, loaded with rakes, pitchforks, scythes, and every farming tool imaginable, came crashing down from the sky. Calidus glanced back just in time to see its enormous shadow falling directly behind her. The massive cart slammed into the ground with a thunderous explosion. The tremendous shockwave blasted both dragons out of the air. T-Bone spun helplessly through the sky while Calidus lost control completely, bouncing violently across the dusty ground as the desperate chase finally came to an abrupt stop. Calidus slammed into the ground in a cloud of dust, immediately jumping back onto all fours with her fangs bared as she roared furiously. Before she could charge again, Kim hurried over with both hands raised, desperately trying to calm her down. He begged her to wait just a second so they could talk things out like reasonable people. Calidus answered with her claws. In an instant, she launched herself straight at Kim and raked his face with a relentless flurry of swipes, leaving him screaming in agony as he stumbled backward. Any hope of peaceful negotiations disappeared almost immediately. Meanwhile, T-Bone had finally recovered enough to understand what was happening. Looking at Kim being shredded in the background, the little blue dragon let out an indignant cry before suddenly throwing himself at Calidus. The two tiny dragons instantly became a blur of claws, wings, and tails as they rolled wildly across the dirt, punching and tackling each other without holding anything back. After several seconds of tumbling, they sprang apart at the same time. Both dragons landed facing one another across the field, lowering their bodies into fighting stances. Calidus planted herself firmly on all fours, glaring with burning determination, while T-Bone slid to a stop on the opposite side, eyes locked on his opponent. Unable to hold it in any longer, T-Bone angrily demanded to know why this violet brat had tried to kidnap him in the first place. Calidus flared with blazing flames as a fiery aura surrounded her tiny body. Looking down on him with unmistakable pride, she declared that dragons were noble beings. They had no business associating with lowly demons. That instantly struck a nerve. T-Bone shot back without hesitation, fiercely defending the people who had raised him. He insisted they were his family and told Calidus she was the one acting beneath a dragon by insulting them. Instead of calming down, Calidus became even angrier. Still wrapped in flames, she admitted she'd already been in a terrible mood after being sealed inside that unbearably hot place for so long. Now she had another excuse to vent all that frustration, declaring she'd roast this brat first. She exploded forward in a burst of fire and slammed directly into T-Bone, driving him into the ground before pinning him beneath her. Then came an absolutely one-sided beatdown. Calidus unleashed punch after punch without giving T-Bone any chance to recover. Kim and Artanis could only stand there watching as the tiny red dragon continuously hammered the poor blue dragon into the dirt. Despite T-Bone's desperate squeaks, Calidus never slowed down, determined to teach him a lesson. Finally, after exhausting herself, she paused. Steam drifted from her face as she stared down at T-Bone with a puzzled expression. Something felt strange. T-Bone, battered and teary-eyed beneath her, managed to weakly mutter a single word. That was when everything changed. Calidus's furious expression suddenly melted away. The blazing flames surrounding her disappeared completely as she quietly leaned closer to T-Bone. Instead of attacking him again, she cuddled him. T-Bone froze in complete confusion while Calidus happily snuggled against him, realizing his icy dragon body felt unbelievably cool after everything she'd been through. To her, he wasn't annoying anymore, he was the perfect walking air conditioner. Kim, who had spent the entire chase running himself ragged, finally caught up, panting heavily as he looked at the two dragons in complete disbelief. Seeing that the fighting had finally stopped, he cautiously reached out and politely asked if Calidus could give T-Bone back now that she'd calmed down. Calidus immediately wrapped both arms around T-Bone and hugged him possessively. With absolute conviction, she flatly refused. From that day forward, she proudly declared, T-Bone belonged to her. He was now the love of her life. T-Bone could only sit there completely shell-shocked, unable to process how a life-or-death fight had somehow turned into this. As if delivering the final punchline, the system quietly revealed the tragic truth. This was the day baby dragon T-Bone's fate was sealed, the beginning of thousands of years as a thoroughly henpecked husband.
Like, share.
A strong gust of wind sweeps across the area as the tall tower rises against the rugged mountains, with the warm sunset casting a peaceful glow over the landscape. But right in front of this beautiful scenery, T-Bone is dealing with a completely different kind of problem. Calidus has completely calmed down after their earlier fight, but now she has become extremely attached to T-Bone. She snuggles tightly against him with sparkling, affectionate eyes, happily telling him to just stay still for a while because being this close to them feels so good. T-Bone, meanwhile, is clearly not enjoying the situation nearly as much. He squirms around uncomfortably, trying to get some space from her clingy affection. Kim crouches nearby, watching the two dragons carefully. Seeing that they have finally stopped fighting, he figures that the hot-tempered dragon must have genuinely taken a liking to T-Bone. But as Calidus affectionately rubs her cheek against T-Bone's, it becomes pretty obvious that this affection is going in only one direction. T-Bone suddenly has enough. He pushes Calidus away with an alarmed cry and immediately flies upward, trying to escape her grasp. Calidus follows right after him, and the two dragons begin fluttering around through the air while Kim watches from below. Kim quickly catches onto the situation. If Calidus really likes T-Bone this much, then maybe he can use that to his advantage. A mischievous grin slowly spreads across his face as he decides to step in. Kim approaches Calidus and politely asks her to stop bothering their dear T-Bone. But instead of listening, Calidus snaps her tiny jaws shut around Kim's finger. Kim cries out in pain, but strangely enough, he looks pleased with himself. He realizes that Calidus has taken the bait exactly as he intended. Still holding up his bitten finger, Kim dramatically cries out to T-Bone that Daddy is dying. Calidus pauses at the word Daddy, clearly surprised by the relationship between the two. T-Bone also reacts immediately, looking shocked as he hears Kim calling for him. The moment T-Bone moves toward Kim, Calidus and T-Bone collide in midair. The two dragons crash into each other and tumble down to the ground, bouncing and skidding across the dirt before finally separating. T-Bone lands on all fours, then transforms into his pale-skinned human form with long white hair. Seeing Kim standing there with tears in his eyes and clutching his injured finger, T-Bone immediately steps in front of him protectively. He firmly tells Calidus to stop bullying his daddy, making it very clear that whatever happens, he's going to protect Kim. Then Calidus suddenly becomes surrounded by a brilliant swirl of flames. Her small red dragon body transforms before their eyes, and when the flames disappear, a beautiful red-haired woman in a flowing red dress is standing there. Kim is left completely stunned. He can't understand how she was able to transform so quickly after just awakening. He starts wondering if Calidus had somehow grown while being trapped inside the summer flame and only now managed to reveal this form. Calidus then kneels before them, while T-Bone remains standing protectively in front of her. This time, she speaks calmly and formally, apologizing for how rude she had been earlier. She introduces herself as Calidus, the flame dragon, and explains that being sealed away for such a long time caused her to lose control of herself for a moment. But then she immediately makes another shocking request. Calidus leans forward passionately and asks Kim to give his son to her. T-Bone's eyes widen in complete disbelief. He can't even process what he's hearing and immediately protests, asking what she means. Kim, on the other hand, sees another opportunity. He leans over T-Bone with a mischievous grin and tells Calidus that whether she gets to have T-Bone depends entirely on how she behaves. Calidus eagerly clasps her hands together and promises that she'll do anything. T-Bone is completely horrified by this conversation because nobody seems to care about what he actually wants. He desperately points out that his feelings should matter too. Kim doesn't seem particularly concerned. He simply grabs T-Bone by the collar and hands him over to Calidus, essentially deciding the matter himself. Then, with a cheerful wave, Kim tells Calidus to take T-Bone and get back to work. Calidus happily accepts, carrying T-Bone with her and enthusiastically calling Kim father. Artanis watches this entire exchange from nearby with a heavy, deadpan expression, clearly thinking that Kim is being far too mean to T-Bone. With the new arrangement in place, Calidus and T-Bone begin working together in the rice fields. Calidus uses her fire while T-Bone uses his water, combining the two powers to create exactly the right temperature for the patties. Thanks to the unexpected help of this new daughter-in-law and T-Bone, the demons can finally control the water temperature properly, meaning Kim's plan to accelerate the rice's tillering can move forward. Kim stands nearby with his arms crossed and a confident smile, pleased with the result and thinking that the rice's tillering is about to become explosive. At that moment, T-Bone flies past King Stoma, and the little dragon happily greets his beaver friend. King Stoma immediately recognizes him and proudly responds, happy to see T-Bone again. King Stoma is especially pleased that T-Bone now has someone of his own kind to spend time with. He admits that he had been worried because T-Bone often seemed lonely before. T-Bone doesn't quite know how to respond to that at first. He simply floats there, looking confused, before glancing toward Calidus. Calidus is flying nearby in her small red dragon form, and when she suddenly makes an adorable, cheerful expression, T-Bone's reaction changes completely. His eyes sparkle as he looks at her, clearly becoming charmed despite everything that happened earlier. From below, Kim watches the two dragons working together and notices their relationship developing. Looking at Calidus, he begins to reconsider his earlier impression of her. Maybe she isn't actually a truly bad dragon after all. As the two dragons continue controlling the water temperature, the rice paddies finally begin to flourish. The once struggling crops grow abundantly, showing that all of Kim's farming efforts are finally paying off. And the improvement isn't limited to the rice. Serdi walks happily through the fields carrying baskets of crops with her many arms, while Azurat and Flute walk alongside her, also looking pleased. The crops are ripening everywhere, and after all the hard work, everyone can finally breathe a little easier. Nearby, Artani sits comfortably beneath a tree, enjoying the peaceful atmosphere. T-Bone and Calidus sit beside her, while King Stoma playfully peeks out from her hair, turning the quiet scene into another strangely wholesome gathering. With the crops growing and everyone finally able to live from what they produce, the demons no longer have to worry about simply surviving from day to day. And after everything that happened, Kim finally gets a chance to rest. He lies peacefully on his bed with one arm behind his head, completely asleep. For once, there is no crisis to deal with, no emergency to solve, and no one demanding his attention. Everyone can finally make a living now. The scene begins in a strange, ethereal realm where Kim, still wearing his white coat, hangs upside down in the reflection of the watery space below. As he looks down, the shadowy figure of Kratos gradually comes into view, and Kim realizes that Kratos is actually conscious again. Kim sits upright, surprised that Kratos can move around on his own, and asks how he managed to wake up this time. Kratos explains that he originally assumed his consciousness would appear whenever Kim fainted, but that theory was wrong. Instead, he has started to notice a different pattern. Whenever the demons are well-fed, comfortable, and at peace, something about that peaceful state seems to awaken his consciousness. Kim can only stare at him in disbelief because, honestly, that is probably the strangest way anyone could possibly regain consciousness. Kratos, however, doesn't have an answer for why it works that way. He simply says that he is also just a small part of a much greater law established by something beyond the heavens, so if Kim really wants answers, he should ask the beings who have been helping him. And right on cue, the blue system window appears in the void. The system admits that since Kratos already knows about its existence, there is no longer any reason to hide. Kratos immediately takes the opportunity to ask the question that has clearly been bothering him: what exactly is the system, and why is it helping Kim Jang-cheol and the demons? The system gives a surprisingly honest answer. It doesn't completely understand everything itself either, so it can't explain every detail. But there is one thing it can reveal: the beings behind the system come from the future, or more accurately, from somewhere in a much, much higher universe. Kim immediately compares that to a simulation universe, and the system basically confirms that the comparison isn't completely wrong. But then things get serious. The system reveals that something enormous is going to happen in Kim's world, and if that problem is left unchecked, its consequences could spread far beyond their own world and affect multiple dimensions. That's the real reason the system has been helping Kim and the demons. Kim immediately connects the dots and asks if that means he was brought into this world specifically to deal with that problem, and whether all the suffering he's gone through was part of some grand plan. The system quickly corrects him. It wasn't actually the system that summoned Kim. Instead, Kim's power and the demon's power are both necessary to prevent the coming disaster, which is why the system has simply been lending them its strength. A flashback shows Kratos fighting alongside Hartok, Baal, and Azurat, making it clear that the demons themselves are just as important to whatever is coming. That leaves Kim even more confused. If the system didn't summon him, then how did he even end up in this world in the first place? Unfortunately, the system doesn't have that answer either. It says that they are still investigating it. But one thing is already clear: Kim has to continue feeding and supporting the demons. Kratos then turns toward the system, his expression becoming much more serious. If this mysterious being really stands beyond the level of a god, he has one question that matters more than anything else. Once everything is over, will the demon race actually be safe? The system pauses before giving a frustratingly vague answer: yes, for now. Kim immediately steps in, clearly unhappy with that response. He demands to know what kind of answer that is and asks whether our demon race is truly going to be okay. And then the system catches onto one particular word. Kim doesn't hesitate. Of course, he said "our." He is the demon lord now, and that means the demons are his responsibility. He can't stand the thought of anyone under his rule going hungry, because if he's going to call himself their lord, then he has to actually take care of them. Kratos silently watches Kim make that declaration, while the system finally acknowledges his feelings and encourages them to keep doing everything they can to save the demon race. Later, Kim is lying on his bed with his hands behind his head, staring at the ceiling while everything that happened keeps running through his mind. He eventually asks the messenger about that mysterious serious problem again. Surely the system knows more about it, right? But Kim gets nowhere. He sits up with an irritated sigh, complaining that these beings are incredibly selfish, but at the end of the day, he decides he has no choice except to keep doing whatever he can for now. Still, the warning bothers him. Out in the fields, Kim watches the demons working among the crops while thinking about the mysterious variable the system mentioned. Something is clearly going to happen, but he has no idea what that variable could be. Then something strange catches his attention. One of the workers is trembling badly while holding a basket of harvested crops. Kim immediately approaches and asks what's wrong, wondering if the demon is sick. The worker insists that he isn't sick, he's simply feeling strangely cold. Kim finds that suspicious. A demon feeling cold? Before he can think much more about it, he notices another worker nearby also shivering. Now Kim starts looking around the entire field, realizing this isn't an isolated case. More and more workers are suddenly complaining about the cold. Then, without warning, one of the workers collapses face first into the soil. Everyone around him panics and rushes over, while Kim immediately runs to help. He grabs the fallen demon and asks where it hurts, but the worker is still shaking uncontrollably. Kim places his hand against the worker's back and suddenly realizes something is very wrong. The worker is burning with a high fever. And yet he's shivering as if he's freezing. Kim's expression changes completely as the pieces finally come together. He looks around the field and sees more and more demons and humans suffering from the same symptoms. Then the realization hits him. This isn't just ordinary sickness. It's malaria.